Right. Hi, everybody. Thank you
Hi.
all for joining us. It's me, Adele, here with
Hey
Celeste.
guys.
And we've got Sam Karashi, who
Mm.
you may know from Instagram. He's got a really awesome Instagram account with lots of great quotes and really in depth thoughts around, well, just philosophy kind of related things. I know Sam through my involvement with like the Wim Hof method. We met at a workshop recently here in London, and I thought that Sam would be a great person to have on to talk about hypermobility from the kind of psychological perspective, and especially addressing the issue of anxiety, which a lot of hypermobile people do struggle with. So I'll just turn it over to you, Sam. Tell us a little bit about you and your background.
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. I guess it's been a long time coming. You were saying we just met with Wim Hof recently, and that was the first time we actually met face to face. It's been a while. I come from Saudi Arabia. That's where I grew up. That's where I studied all the way to medical school. That's where I practiced as well. So I was practicing originally as a psychiatric resident in an addiction hospital, and I've spent about 7 years doing that. And throughout that time, I've seen over 10,000 patients. Then I decided to walk away from my medical career for multiple reasons. One of them being is I wanted to reach more people in a shorter amount of time, and one-on-one wouldn't just cut it because there's a lot more people that need more help. And it just didn't make sense, among other reasons. But I just felt that there was an element of limitation by just focusing on medication. I think it acts as a biochemical crutch. It's not that it's not useful, but I was just curious to find a way that may actually work better for people. And so when I walked away from the practice, I decided to basically explore what I like to call unorthodox psychology. So people that are experts in psychology, that work beyond the frame of psychology, that are masters of the mind in a unique way, like the top cold reader in the world who can convince anyone he's psychic even though he isn't. There's something there. The top pickpocket in the UK, who is a master of space and attention management, who actually stole my phone during the interview 3 times in less than 5 minutes, but that's a different story.
Wow.
It's just interesting how learning how to step into someone's space and, in other words, master attention and management of yourself and other people. So there's always applications. The horse whisperer, Monty Roberts, who can communicate with horses through eye contact and body language. There's so much you can learn about connecting with yourself if we use the horse as a metaphor for the mind or communicating with other people. I learned so much about connecting with other people just by connecting with horses from a distance and getting the horse to move faster and slower, even though we're like 5 meters away.
Wow.
There's a very interesting connection there. So in general, the reason for that is basically my moonshot was to abolish emotional slavery, because I think we're all slaves to our emotions in some way or form. And I have this jigsaw puzzle called the mind. And everybody that I'm interviewing or I'm learning from is basically part of that jigsaw puzzle piece. Is a jigsaw puzzle piece in that jigsaw puzzle. Wim Hof is one, for example, which is how we met. You guys, yeah.
Guys, sorry to interrupt you, but just to give people at home an understanding of who Wim Hof is, in case they don't know, he is someone who pioneered the benefits of cold exposure, and he is,
As well as a certain breathing technique.
to make that possible. Yeah. Yes. So sorry to interrupt you, Sam.
No, of
I
course.
just wanted to give people a picture so that they know, because I think what you're saying is so valuable. But yeah, please carry on. So Wim Hof was one of them.
Wim Hof was one of them. I trained with a samurai in Japan last year. We did sword fighting, aikijutsu, to learn. There's something interesting about ego taming, for example, from a samurai's perspective. But this is the thing. These guys are masters of what they do. Mm-hmm. And they do things that traditional psychologists, aren't applying because they haven't really studied it. And I think nobody has approached it in such a way. And I think there's something interesting to kind of create from that. And that fascinated me, which got me on that journey.
So,
an example, yeah.
I'm just curious if maybe all of that experience that you've had working with all these amazing geniuses, really, and tapping into this genius. We can even put hypermobility perhaps to one side, but let's just look at anxiety perhaps as an umbrella. You know, with the things that you've been talking about and learning how to tap into people, when you've actually looked at working with people with things, have you worked with many people with anxiety? I'm sure you have, given all these years of experience.
I did. I mean, in addiction, you do have psychotic, psychosis. You have mood. You have anxiety. You have different induced, drug-induced disorders. And so I did work. I didn't work with anxiety specifically as much as I worked with psychosis, but I did work with anxiety. And to be honest, this is actually, anxiety in itself is a main issue for a lot of people in the world, regardless of whether you're a patient that was admitted to an addiction hospital. Everybody has anxiety. I mean, if we want to simplify it, if we talk about anxiety, stress, or fear, we're pretty much talking about the same thing. We're talking about the fight or flight response. We're talking about the stress.
Big time. Yes, so true. And I mean, just given that understanding that you have, this depth of knowledge, like, are there any things like patterns that you've noticed, or maybe specific tools that can maybe really enhance the quality of these people's lives? I mean, I'm someone who's always battled with this like nervous energy, and I think the three things that you've just said really sums it up. But if you have any tangible tools that you can offer, I think people will be so grateful.
Well, in terms of stress, I've been researching stress for about 20 years, so it was, a long time to just focus on that. But there are a couple of things that I've noticed that worked better than others. One of them was the M-Wave. M-Wave is a device created by the HeartMath Institute. These guys are probably some of the smartest people on the planet. Scientists have been researching the interaction of the relationship between the heart and the brain. And one of the things they've discovered, and they're connected to Oxford University, which was very interesting to discover 3 years ago, 80% of the connection or the communication between the heart and the brain is from the heart to the brain, which kind of flips things around. So the heart is sending signals to the brain. And if you look at the literature for centuries, there are indications of the connection between the heart and the brain, that the heart actually is the governing body in the body, but we never really, we just thought it was just like fables or something, but we read about this. And this is the first kind of scientific research that actually supports that. So they created a device called the M-Wave, and they created another one called M-Wave 2.0, which is the one I've been using for the last 5 years. I've purchased it in bulk just to share it with people because it's amazing. What it does is it's in a way, it's kind of a biofeedback device, but what it does is it detects your pulse, and then it allows you to follow a light in order to breathe in a certain way. When you breathe in that way, you achieve something that they've discovered called heart coherence. And heart coherence allows you, in a way, to basically create a synchronicity between your breath, your heart rate, and your brain waves. And it creates a beautiful state. This is the most effective stress in reducing technique that I've ever come across. I've come across a lot. And what was amazing about it is, if you have a traumatic experience and you immediately grab that like coach, sort of, because it's hard, even if I know how to breathe in the right way, it may be hard for me to breathe the way that I need to breathe in order to calm down, because I'm stressed in this moment because I just had a traumatic experience. Yeah. But if you have just someone to follow or something to follow, and you have it with you in your pocket, and it's very small, suddenly it takes you out. And I remember about 5 years ago, I had a traumatic experience that would probably make me sleep for 3 to 4 days on the couch, not doing anything else. And I used that device, and I used it for about 30 to 45 minutes. After the 45 minutes, I was able to function normally as if a traumatic experience didn't happen. Now that is, given the fact that I knew what was going to happen if I didn't use the device, that was amazing for me. and I kept on basically sharing it with other people. It's fantastic. I have a friend that has, yeah.
How do people get hold of this? Because I mean, I'm just curious for myself. I would love to get this device that you're talking about. Sounds completely life-changing.
It's, I mean, I had a friend who had panic attacks, and I recommended that, and she never had a panic. She hadn't had a panic attack since. It's over a year and a half, and she's just been using it on a daily basis for 15 minutes.
Just give me a second. Sorry.
So is this something that's available to buy online? Or
yes. If you go to HeartMath, if you Google HeartMath Institute, I'm not sure if it's the HeartMath Institute, but if you Google HeartMath Institute, you'll find their website, and they do sell it on the website. They also sell it on, it's also available on Amazon, I believe. It's still available on Amazon. M-Wave is EM, by the way, EM Wave 2.0.
And if people didn't want to purchase a device to help them with their breathing, is there something else, just in terms of like using a breathing method to deal with anxiety, that you would suggest, or anything else?
Of course. Well, I have a couple that I thought worked better than anything else that I've discovered. This is one of them. This is actually probably the number one. And what is competing for number two, for the number two spot, is the Wim Hof method, which you're very familiar with. It's just incredible in terms of and just to touch upon that, if I may, just to touch upon that quickly. Yeah, so the Wim Hof breathing basically plays with the oxygen carbon dioxide ratio in the brain. It raises your adrenaline and lowers your cortisol levels. It raises your pH levels, which you can test through a pH strip, basically saliva samples or urine samples, but you basically see that. And it just stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system and just switches off the sympathetic. Now, it starts off by turning on the sympathetic, but then it resets it. So that's what's beautiful about it.
Again, sorry, Osama, I'm sorry to cut you off again, but just to give again people a little bit of info, your parasympathetic nervous system is the rest and repair part of your body, and the sympathetic is your fight or flight. Did we cover that? You guys, okay. Yeah. Just so that people don't get confused, but the fight or flight's your sympathetic, parasympathetic, rest and repair.
Exactly. So the Wim Hof method is the second, if not, it's competing for the first place. But these are the two top, the M-Wave and the Wim Hof method. The Wim Hof method is very simple to apply and to use, and what makes it even more powerful is applying exercise with it. But not to get into too much detail, but it is incredible, and it only takes 5 to 10 minutes. And it just suddenly switches everything. Suddenly you feel different. There's mental clarity, there's relaxation, there's focus, there's energy.
Cool.
These are the two things that I recommend. Again, anxiety has been reduced massively for several people that I know that have anxiety just by applying the Wim Hof only. And there's someone that was smart enough to actually apply both, to do Wim Hof in the morning and the M-Wave at night. I thought that was genius. So, those are the two most effective techniques for reducing anxiety.
Okay, cool. So I wanted to also get you to talk a little bit about a conversation that you and I had, whenever that was, last week. Because of course, in our little group of hypermobile yogis, of course, most people are going to be into their yoga practice, and yoga is more than just movement. There's a whole other lifestyle that comes with yoga, and what interested me was you were talking about structured flexibility in terms of how you live life. And I thought that's so interesting because Celeste and I are talking about structured flexibility in terms of how hypermobile people need to move in their asana practice. But then what draws so many people to yoga is what you learn when you're on the mat can be applied to life off the mat. And so this idea of structured flexibility, this idea of not going too far into one extreme or the other, of course, can be applied so beautifully to life in general. And I think that can also play a part in helping us to understand how much control we can have actually over our anxiety instead of letting it control us. So if I'm not cutting you off from
no, not at all. Not at all.
I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Okay, at the heart of what I'm building at the moment, and it just keeps coming, is the concept of centralism. Right now I'm calling it centralism. And if you Google centralism, you probably find something else, but centralism to me is the idea of living in the middle ground, setting up camp in middle ground in your mind. And one of the main problems we have in life, the cause of conflict, is the detachment between two extremes, because most people live in one extreme or the other. Think of it as black or white. Most people are either black or white in terms of the way they think. And anybody that considers living in the middle ground, in the center, is always violently opposed, because you need to choose one or two. When the thing is, we have choice of not choosing anything or choosing whatever we want, but suddenly we're forced to choose one of two things. So to others, the middle ground is a gray area, and the gray area is shady. It's a sign of hesitation. It's a sign of fear, indecisiveness, vagueness, and people don't like that. But to me, the way I look at it is, what lives in middle ground, what lives in the center between black and white, is the entire color spectrum. This is where flexibility lives in. This is where balance lives in. This is where control lives in. This is where power lives in. The center, because you become a liaison to both extremes.
This is beautiful.
You can understand both extremes. You can connect both extremes. You can use both extremes. You don't have to abandon one. But when somebody is thinking and living in one extreme, they abandon the other.
We love that.
So to them, to a lot of people, it's either one or the other, when you can have both. Why this or that? Why not this and that? Why not be selective? An example of that would be, there's not, and we talked about this before, there's not enough time, there's always time. There's not enough time, you're always living in urgency. You get a lot of things done, but how's that affecting the quality of your life? Constantly living in stress because you're living in urgency, constantly. There's always time. You can chill, relax, enjoy your life, but you're not going to get anything done. So in a way, the question is, which one do you choose? And this is what people think. The thing is, we need both. We need both. So it's not about which one to choose. It's about which one to choose at any given time. So it depends on the context. So they're both powerful. It's just, when do we use it? For me, for example, when I want to start, I create the sense of urgency by saying there's not enough time. And the moment I suddenly start to move towards a task, I switch that off and move to there's always time, since I'm in the process of the action, so I can immerse, enjoy what I'm doing, do it in the best way possible, and learn from it, instead of continue to living in urgency, because the sense of urgency was supposed to be to trigger us to start, but not to keep switching it on, to exhaust us while we're doing it. We're already doing it. We don't need the sense of urgency. Let's slow down a bit to do it well. Let's slow down a bit to enjoy. So these are two, this is an example. Another example is presence. Now, that's another example. The past and the future, those are two extremes to me. The centerpiece is the present moment. And that's where you can actually visit the past and visit the future whenever you want, in any way you like, but you live in the present moment. The issue is that people live in the past, so they're trapped, or they live in the future, so they're trapped because they're missing out on what they can do now to create the future they want. So that's another example. Now, to tie this back to hypermobility, we talked about, I remember, strength as one end, for example, and mobility in the other, for example. But when we were talking about this, it just made a lot more sense for hypermobility to be extreme, and just focusing on strength for the other extreme. The center would be the mobility itself. Now, strength, too much strength and too much focusing on strength will create rigidity. And we can use also structure. So strength, structure, hypermobility, hyperflexibility. What's the center? Mobility, flexibility, which is really the structured flexibility. Too much structure, too much strength. The strength creates rigidity. Hypermobility, hyperflexibility creates instability. So the place to be in is in the center. You strengthen yourself, but you also focus on stretching yourself as well. But with the strength, they complement one another. This is what's at the heart of what I talk about. People think that extremes constantly oppose, when there's a complementing effect of both. It's just that we're so caught up in one end that we don't see the other. An example would be living in the center is like living at the top of the mountain. Living in the extremes is like living at the bottom of both sides. You never see the other side. You can't understand the other side because you're not in a place where you can see both and understand both.
This
So
is
it's
useful for like yoga people, because I look at, the way that yoga is being taught currently, I personally feel that there's a lot of room for improvement. I don't feel like we should abandon it, because I think there's so much value there. But I really feel like we've had so much focus on just hanging out in passive stretches, and we feel like that's, going to make me a better person when I leave my mat. And there's almost like people bad-mouthing strength training. When you're in a yoga class, they'll be like, oh, you should never lift weights. Body weight's the best weight. It's like they've got such a, like what you're saying, they're on this other side of the mountain, but they almost don't want to look on the other side. And then of course you get this as well when you're in the gym and you're talking to the strength guys and they're like, oh, yoga, that's not for me. It's all that stretching. But really, if we could climb to the top of the mountain and have a view of both sides, how much more health, not just physically, but mentally, that would actually give us, because we have a more balanced approach. So there's so much value and we're just missing out.
Yeah.
Yes. One thing I would recommend is asking yourself in any situation, am I living in an extreme right now, or am I living in the center?
It's beautiful what you're saying.
It is. And because it can literally be applied to anything in life. I think you can kind of think of everything in life as being too far towards the flexibility or hyper flexibility, or too far towards structure and too much rigidity. You can probably apply it to literally any aspect of life. And so I feel like it's such a beautiful concept, because if you're ever feeling anxious about something, then you can take a step back, look at it objectively, and see if you are living in some extreme about what it is that you're anxious about, what it is that you're struggling with, and how can you bring yourself out of that extreme and up the mountain towards that centralism point of view.
Absolutely. Here's the thing though, if you are anxious, you've already answered the question because you're already living in an extreme. It's hard to be anxious if you're in the center.
So good. It's just so good. You've got such a good mind, and the way you look at things is so beautiful. Have you got any other insights, perhaps just within your experiences, within, I know, I'm digressing. We've given you a vague plan, but I'm so curious about you and your mind and how much you know. But with your experiences and having worked with all these different people, is there any insights that you can offer us, especially given we're working with people that are very nervous energy? Our bodies have to work so much harder. We struggle with fatigue. If there are any insights, just like the one you shared with us, that you think are valuable to pass on, I would be so grateful to hear it.
One thing I would say would be acceptance. The key to freedom is acceptance. And a lot of people assume that acceptance is basically surrender, or acceptance is submission, when accepting a situation is not about surrendering to it. It's actually about freeing yourself from it. Mm-hmm. It's just that it's accepting its existence doesn't mean you have to accept its persistence. So you accept the existence of it and then you move on from it. But what most people do is they remain trapped wherever they are because they are living in denial. They deny the existence of the problem. And so the problem remains in their life. And they wonder why they can't move on. But the thing is, when you detach from something because you don't want to deal with it, whether it's an emotion, whether it's a situation, whether it's anything, and you leave it there, you just push it away, you resist it, you don't accept it, you cannot own it. we cannot release what we don't own, and we cannot own what we do not accept. As long as it's further away from us, we can never get rid of it, because we need to get close enough to embrace it, to release it. But it's so far, it's like on the shelf and we don't want to touch it, but we want it to go away. And it's there. So acceptance would be a very important piece, definitely, in conversations. This happens all the time. Anxiety in general will stem from tension. Tension stems from resistance. So you're resisting, you suddenly create tension, there's conflict, there's stress. It's not just in conversations, it's in anything. But to tie that into, well, there's something else as well, which is problems. A problem is a mental construct. There's nothing is a problem until we decide it is. So if something is a problem in our life, we resist it, we create conflict, we create stress. If it's no longer a problem, there's no conflict. And if there's no conflict, there's no stress. Which means now we have the choice of either just living with it or actually changing it and moving on from it. But it's not out of a need, it's out of a choice. It's out of choice, not need. Can I mention something about the need and choice that we touched upon? Actually,
just loving everything you're saying. It helps us so much.
Thank you.
It's going to help.
I'm glad to hear that. In terms of need, for example, I'll give you an example. When I was with the Horse Whisperer, they were talking about the idea that when a horse experiences fear in the pen, they never take the horse out until the horse neutralizes the fear, because if the horse leaves, the horse is basically forced to leave out of the fear, but it takes the fear with it.
Wow.
But when the fear is dissolved, because we desensitize that fear on the spot when they're there, when the horse leaves without fear. That ties into something else as well, with the Wim Hof method. You basically get into the ice bath, and you have this, maybe a bit of pain, the sensation of cold, and then you decide to leave, because it's not really a decision, but you're forced to leave because you have a need to leave from the pain, from the stress, from the cold, the sensation of the cold. And what I found is the longer you stay, in the same way that they dealt with the horse, the moment you calm down and relax in the cold, in the ice bath, then you decide to leave. Now you've left out of choice, and you were not forced, because there was no fear that was pushing you away. You conquered that fear. So you walked out, which means that when you leave, you don't feel intimidated by the ice bath. You can always go back.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this goes back to what you were saying earlier, that before you can, how was it that you put it? Before you can detach yourself from something, you have to accept it first. Because with fear, for example, if you're afraid of something and you want to just not be afraid of it anymore, unless you understand exactly what you're afraid of, exactly what it is that you fear, you can't overcome that fear. And in order to understand it, you have to get closer to it. And it's like that. That's what I found, like with the ice bath, for example, and what you're saying is, if I had let all of the thoughts that were in my head, like, this is uncomfortable, I don't like this, I want to get out. If I had let those thoughts control me, and I had gotten out of the ice bath, then I wouldn't have understood those thoughts. Therefore, I wouldn't have been able to conquer those thoughts. Whereas by staying in the ice bath until I understood where those thoughts were coming from, which for me I realized it was just my body trying to protect itself. It was just the natural the natural instinct to move out of discomfort and into comfort. But once I understood that, and I realized, hang on though, being in this ice bath isn't harmful. It's not something that I need to change right now, because it is going to be over soon. And I'm making this choice to be here in this ice. As soon as I realized those thoughts, I realized that was the reason for those thoughts, then those thoughts went away, and I was suddenly comfortable in the ice. Wow. And then I was able to get out of the ice by my own choice.
Choice, exactly. That's the key.
That's what you said earlier, yes.
Yeah.
It's a decision.
It's a decision. most of the things we have, the issue is we're kind of stuck with being forced to do something, pressured by other people, pressured by our own fears, pressured. So one thing we did touch upon, I think you actually posted it on your Instagram as well, related. We had that conversation the day we met at the Wim Hof Method, and we were going for dinner. The need, whenever I feel that there's a need coming up at the moment, I stick with it until it's no longer a need. And therefore, now I have a choice whether to do it or walk away. So the discomfort comes from the sense of need that I have at the moment. The moment I realize that there's a need, until I actually meet it, that gap is an uncomfortable situation, as an uncomfortable period. So I stick with it and I decide to not do it. I just decide to stay with it and I just decide to not meet that need. And suddenly that discomfort goes away. And now I have the choice. Do I want to do it or do I walk away? But there are little things that are happening on a daily basis, even posting on Instagram. You know, sometimes I feel like I got to rush. Whenever you're rushing to something, just stop for a moment, because rushing means that you're kind of feeling that your body's forcing you to move quickly because you need. Most of the things in our lives are not a need. It's just that it's an elusive need.
Yeah.
And the moment we start breaking this, the mind basically realizes that, oh, okay, so that's not a need anymore. We're kind of I'm trying to re-educate my mind to making a distinction between an actual need and the majority of things which are not actually a need. And it is liberating. It is absolutely liberating.
And I feel like that when you are in that hurried state, like one of the symptoms that goes along with hypermobility, because our connective tissue doesn't work well, is we have gut issues. But you know, when you're talking, I'm just realizing that possibly a large part of it is that I'm just rushing through life, and my poor body is rushing everything it's doing because it's trying to keep up with me. And what's really trying to keep up with ultimately is my own thinking and my perception that I need to be somewhere a lot quicker or on time, and you're right, it is just perception, and that creates our reality.
Absolutely. A key phrase is you don't have to, and it's okay. Those are two key phrases. For acceptance, you don't have to. There's so many have tos in our life that aren't actually a have to. You don't have to. You don't have to hold on to the resentment you have for someone else. You don't have to. And it's amazing when you say that sometimes at a key moment with someone that is holding on to a resentment, you see suddenly a release. It's like, by telling somebody that you don't have to, I gave them permission to no longer need to. Just by saying that at the right time. I'm giving them permission to accept letting go of what they thought they were meant to hold on to for the rest of their life. And that's powerful when you see that happening. And we always have this, I have to do it, until somebody tells you, you don't have to. And suddenly the autopilot switches off and you're like, oh, the spell is broken, the hypnotic state is broken. You're like, oh, I don't have to. And suddenly have that relief. Yes, I don't have to, I'm free. We can give that to ourselves.
Yeah.
And just to tie back into the conversation thing, accepting other people's opinions as their truth, not yours, instead of resisting the fact that it's true or not. It's a different way of looking at it. That ties into the impressionist and acting, and that's a different kind of jigsaw puzzle piece, and the yes and constantly going through. Maintaining the flow of the conversation is more important than proving a point. Acceptance really is about giving yourself permission to understand, whether it's a person, whether it's an activity, whether it's an experience. Accepting is the key to freedom. And a lot of people think, no, I got to resist in order to free myself. It's the resistance that keeps us trapped, just like the coconut carved out in order to trap a monkey, placing a bait. The monkey places his hand, makes a fist, tries to remove it, gets stuck in the coconut, and panics, and tries harder and resists more. And it's just suddenly he gets trapped. But the thing is, we need to realize that we are doing that. We have 1,000 monkeys in our heads that are trapped, that have their fists trapped in coconuts. And we just need to relax and realize, just accept the fact that we're trapped. And just release.
Let it go.
And suddenly you're free.
Yeah.
It's so simple.
Let go and you're free.
You know, I read this beautiful book, and maybe you've come across it, called Letting Go.
I've heard about it. I read it.
What a life-changing read that was for me. And it's exactly what you're talking about. Like, if those little monkeys just let go, they would then be free and they could run away and they wouldn't be trapped anymore. Have you got, I mean, I'd love to share that resource with everybody at home, Letting Go, The Pathway of Surrender. I can't remember the author right now, but if you have any other resources that you think, actually, this is so beautiful for people to read on. I mean, for sure, you guys have to check out Sam's Instagram, because I think you are gonna, your mind is gonna get blown, as it probably already has. But if you have any other things that you think are useful, please, we'd love to hear more.
In terms of hypermobility, I think two things came to mind. One is, a hypermobile person has an opportunity to practice patience more than anyone else.
Yeah.
Because when you have more of a sense of anxiety, it is an opportunity to practice patience and presence. It is a responsibility to actually do that. You have a reason to do that more than anyone else, but it gives you a different kind of superpower than anyone else as well.
Ah, God. Yeah. I'm sitting here, and like, as soon as you said patience, it was like, no, I don't want to be patient. I don't like being patient. But it's so true. It's so, so true. Like, the bigger struggle that you have with something, the more opportunity, the greater the opportunity to strengthen in that area, right?
And it takes a long time. Like, let's say on a very superficial level, someone has hypermobility and they decide, I'm going to make a change. It takes years of a lot of beating at their craft to feel a change in their body. So the amount of patience that hypermobile people have to develop within themselves is astronomical. So I'm so glad you touched upon that.
Yeah, sorry, and I totally interrupted you. So.
No. Actually, one of the ways to speed up a learning experience is to get out of the way of the experience. And you do that by acceptance. It is our resistance to an experience that blocks our ability to learn from it, to absorb the knowledge within it, to connect with it, to feel that moment, to feel that experience. So that ties into that. The other thing I thought of was humility. I think hypermobile people have a superpower that most people don't. And I think great power comes great responsibility. The idea is, if you are humble, if you practice humility by holding back on the power, not only would you be inspiring to other people for being more of by disciplining yourself, by holding back, because it's so easy to want to stretch, because you could do it.
Yeah.
But I believe true power comes from having it and deciding not to use it for the greater good, which is what you're doing as a hypermobile person, because you're holding back on using the power, not just because a lot of people would want to do that. The question is, if you want to use it, are you using it to show off or are you using it to inspire? And most people, or is it an easy way out? But you're missing out on the learning experience. Be humble with the lesson, to learn it. Just allow yourself to just hold back, not just to learn from the experience, but also to train yourself to be more humble, because you have something most people don't. And that's a gift. And it gives you elements like practicing patience, practicing humility. It helps you, this superpower that you may want to overuse is actually a way for you to become an even better human than others with that power that you have.
Yeah, because we have to, through our human body, learn experientially what other people we have to experience these things that you're talking about every day, every moment. Whereas a lot of people will maybe have single experiences here and there scattered throughout their lives where they have to practice these great higher conscious elements of who we are. So what you said was so perfect. With great power comes great responsibility. We have such a responsibility with these bodies of ours, especially within the yoga world.
Yeah.
If you have a power, needing to use it really shows that you don't have control over that power. But just because you have the power doesn't mean you need to use it. Let go of the need, and you have a choice of using it, but choosing to not use it for the greater good, that's true control. That's true self-control.
Every hypermobile person needs to hear this. I'm like, like just drooling, like mentally drooling over, over this, because it's just so valuable.
Glad to hear that.
Can we interview you again? Because I feel like there's more that you need to tell our community, and you can really help us in such a big way. Is there anything else we want to go into? I'm just aware of time right now.
Well, yeah, we probably should wrap it up so that it's.
But we're definitely going to interview you again, Sam, for sure.
To have you on. Well, I guess just for now, is there any other? I mean, just tell people like where they can find out a little bit more about you until we interview you a second time.
They're going to all know you after this, hopefully.
I'd be honored, of course. Can I make a recommendation? You mentioned letting go. Can I recommend a...
Absolutely. And I want to write down whatever you say.
You may have, I mean, there was one that is very basic and grounded, and a lot of people have read, which is The Power of Now, because I think a hypermobile person would definitely need to read that book, because presence, patience is key. And so that's number one. Number two is The Untethered Soul, which I highly, highly recommend reading it.
Okay. Get that. Oprah's been banging on about it for years.
And to answer your question, people can find me on my Instagram account, Sam Qurashi. That's SAM for Michael, QURASHI. That's it. And it's basically quotes, videos. The idea of changing the way you think to change the way you feel. And it's just provoking, getting you to look at things differently, changing your perception to change your reality is what it's about. So.
You're such a beautiful person, Sam. We can't thank you enough for taking out the time. We know you're a busy person, and for sharing so freely what you know and all of your experiences to help others. You're a wonderful person. I can't wait to meet you properly.
I can't wait to meet you too. Absolutely. It would be a pleasure and an honor. And it was a pleasure being on this. It's just, it just came out of just a simple meeting, and I'm honored to have been here, and I'm honored to be interviewed again at some point. I'd be honored.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.